In this episode of the Project Management Podcast, we look at APQP, which stands for Advanced Product Quality Planning, a framework of procedures and techniques used to develop products, particularly in the automotive industry. Hello and welcome to the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com. We are coming to you live and one day before the excellent 2017 PMI Global Conference in Chicago. I am Cornelius Fichtner, and with me right now is Mary Grace Soleil Erickson. Hello, Mary Grace.
Hi, how are you?
I am doing very well, thank you. And thank you so much for stopping by a day before the conference.
That's right.
And doing this interview.
I'm very excited. Thank you for asking.
So you are the Director of Program Management for a car audio manufacturer. That's as much as we can say, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I lead a team of program managers that builds designs and builds components on the audio division for the automotive industry.
Yeah. So anybody listening to this podcast right now, driving somewhere on a freeway, listening it to their car speakers, there is a chance that it comes from your company.
That's right. Only the good speakers.
Right. And we wanted to talk today about APQP, the Advanced Product Quality Planning.
That's right.
That's a mouthful. What is it?
So APQP is basically the disciplined approach to developing and launching new products. So it's the process that we follow from cradle to grave. How do we build components from when we receive the scope from the customer, how we design it, what deliverables we have up until we launch it into mass production. So that's what we follow.
And when you say the process that we follow, who is we?
So all automotive industry follows this. All components that deliver to the automotive OEMs need to follow the APQP process.
Okay, so we're talking Ford, Chrysler, Toyota, whatever car you're driving.
Yes.
If you are somebody who delivers components for those cars, that's the process you follow.
Right. And in some of the Far East customer, they might not call it the APQP, but the deliverables are the same.
Okay. And my understanding is that APQP came into being because there are so many suppliers who not only supply to one car manufacturer, but to multiple car manufacturers, and they did not want to have to follow 3 or 4 different set of processes.
Right.
And so the car manufacturers actually got together and said, okay, we may be competitors, but we better come up with something to help our suppliers here.
Right. It's more standardized.
Exactly.
Yep.
Okay. The process that we have and that we can hopefully place on the website has a number of steps in it. It begins with a planning cycle, then a product design and development stage, a process design and development stage. After that, we have a product and process validation from where it goes into production. This all looks very much plan-driven. A lot of thinking is done up front before anything happens.
Right.
Is that the case? Is that what the idea is?
Yes, we have to plan how we design, validate, and manufacture the components that gets delivered to the customer. And this is what we use is the APQP. So for my program managers, we make sure that, number one, we understand the scope of what the customer wants to produce. And then we make sure that we plan, we design to the requirements of each of the customers. So each of the OEMs have different requirements in terms of how they want it to function. What type of temperature does it need to not fail, to still function, and also what type of manufacturing they want or capacity they want to produce our components. So there is a lot of planning involved.
And remember, we're only talking about the car audio here. We're talking about the stereo, the amplifiers, the speakers.
That's right.
And you are delivering to that. And then there are other suppliers who have similar specifications and follow the same process, but they deliver the tires or whatever their particular specialty may be.
Yes, that's correct.
In your business, when I look at this cycle here, I can't really tell how long it takes, but at the end, production begins and the planning is on the far left. How long does it take from the initial planning to the production?
So in a perfect world, this sometimes could take up until 3 years.
Okay.
So that's in a perfect world. We can build, head units or speakers and amplifiers for about 3 years, but that's in a perfect world. In reality, the timing is shorter. There's a few reasons for that. One is maybe the customer is not ready to give the award of business. It could potentially be because the technology changes and they want to catch up on that technology. So the scope of the component changes. Or it could be packaging issues. So, maybe they want to prioritize on one technology, but they can't package it in the car. So they're still working on it. And so that makes a delay also for when we have the final scope of the components we need to deliver.
But if it takes normally 3 years and suddenly they're squeezing it into what? Sometimes 2 years, 1 year, shorter even?
Yes. So there are projects that I've worked on where it takes 2 years. There actually is one particular project that it was actually condensed from a 3-year project to a 7-month project.
Oh my!
Yes. So there's a lot of things to be done, and we only have 7 months. And tooling alone is 16 weeks, and I'm sure that some of your listener understands that. So we have to plan and work with even our suppliers to make it happen.
Does this basically mean that you have to get started with all the other processes, even though you don't have the award of business yet? That you say, you know what, we're probably going to get this, but we can't wait any longer. If we want to, we have to start now.
Right. So there are core designs. So whether or not some of the key elements are not finalized, there's always that core design that we can start with. But again, there's a risk of changing that core design, right? Or did we use the correct IC to have enough memory for what they're asking for? Something like that, right? So that changes. But again, the core design's already there. There's some validation that we do during the engineering design phase, which is earlier on to the development. But again, it doesn't change the fact that we are pushing our sub-suppliers as well to make sure that we can deliver on time, on target for our customers.
Interesting, because one thing that I read here is on the history of APQP, it says that this has an emphasis on upfront planning.
Right.
Meaning there's a lot of planning that happens up front, yet I hear you talk about changes and things that and when I then look again at the various steps, planning kind of stops at some point. Physically, the arrow for planning stops and says, after this, there is no more planning, at least here in the drawing. But that's obviously not the case.
Right. So we can only plan so much, I guess, for the scope of the project, but we also need to move forward.
Yeah.
Right? We need to move forward so that we can direct or lead our suppliers into making sure that they can build their tools so that we can deliver an actual part to the customer. So yes, the planning in a perfect world is in the beginning, but there's also a lot of recovery plans is what we call it, where we've planned one thing, there's some changes. It could be driven by the customer. It could be also driven by us as well. And then we have a recovery plan. How do we make sure that the end goal, which is the part that we deliver to the customer, they still receive at the time that when they're expecting it?
Okay. Interesting side note here. Each of these phases has inputs and outputs, very PMBOK guide-like. And one thing that I was wondering here at the end of the plan and define phase, it says one of the outputs design goals, the quality goals, special characteristics, timing. Who signs off on these at this point?
Both internal, which is our own company, and also external, which is the OEMs. So when we're in the planning stage and we've finalized our design or we've frozen the design and we know that this is going to be a quality product, I'm very confident that this is going to be mass produced well. We sign off internally. We make sure that we do cross-functional checks with other functions, meaning not just engineering, but also manufacturing side and also quality. So we sign off on that and then we present it to the customer and say, this is our design. We're very confident that our engineering design will meet your specification and this is the evidences. So that's the output that you're seeing here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one thing we have to also make clear, at this point, you haven't built anything yet, right? These are just designs.
Yes, but we've simulated them.
Okay.
That's right.
All right.
Yeah.
The final output that we haven't yet talked about that's here on the list is management support as an output of the plan and define phase. How do you get management support?
So a lot of different companies, and this is not just within the company I'm working for, have what's called the gating process. The gating process are at the end of each of these phases. And at the gate, we basically tell our steering committee that the product development team have done all of this design work. We have all of these deliverables to prove that we've completed all this design work. Do you have any concerns? Or here's some of the risks that we're taking to the next phase. Do you have any concerns? And so the management has a big impact to that because sometimes, we're not perfect, right? So the product development team might have forgotten one item. Did you check this? Or did you do your cross-functional check with, this purchasing organization, for example? And so that's where this management support comes. And it's almost like a second eye or a second check that, yes, you're on the right track. Or wait, you can't go to the next phase because you forgotten to check one item.
That requires that management is heavily involved.
That's right.
At that stage.
That's right.
Yeah. And this is actually something that when you talk to project managers who come from IT or from other business areas, that they have trouble with getting management on board, getting even time from management to sit down with them at this point and go, okay, let's do a stage gate and let's talk about this. And how many projects, because we're talking about car manufacturing here, there are always new cars and new models coming out, which means that you must constantly have new projects for the stereos in these cars. So how many ongoing projects do you have at the same time? There's
many.
Many.
That's okay. There is many to count, basically. But some of them are not brand new. They're what we call a carryover. So they're the carryover hardware, carryover maybe packaging, but maybe there's some tweaks in the software, right? So then when we do this gating process, we only focus on the changes and what affects the changes and what are the risks involved when you change something. Because obviously we've validated previously a component that's a whole, right? Now you're just changing a portion, but what will be affected by that change? So the gating process would be shorter compared to the brand new technology that we have. But all of these projects, yes, we do put the time and effort from the management team to actually review them. So some, I know some from my previous experience, some companies do a gating review every week globally, right? So they put, they put all of we would call it the steering committee or the management involved in a room, lock them down and basically go over each of the projects. And they, it's a check off the box. It's a green, yellow, and red. Have you done your job? Have you done your task and deliverables? Or did you miss something, but you have a plan, right? Are you yellow? Or red if you've missed something completely, or or if there's a higher risk involved because you've changed something, right?
Your company is larger than just what you manufacture for the cars. There are other areas in your company where you manufacture audio equipment for. The people, the management involved in these decisions, are they specific to the car audio business?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they're really managing the car audio business. So the projects that you are running, that is what pays their salary too.
That's right.
So without them giving the sign off, it's hard for the business to move forward.
It's not just the sign off, it's the expertise.
Right.
Also, right? So because they're focused in one area, they're able to give their expertise of, I know you've done all of this checklist or task, but based on my experience, 17 years ago, this is one of the risks that we've had. And they just give us that input. And yes, we take a look at it because there is some impact moving forward.
Okay, so that's the planning phase. After that, we're moving on to, and these happen in parallel, the product design and development phase, and then the process design and development phase.
Right.
What happens during those two phases?
So the product design and development phase and process design and development phase. So the now that we've confirmed that our ED, that we're comfortable with our ED, we now build prototype samples and we now validate prototype samples.
Functioning prototypes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There are times where even in ED, we actually build parts. Sometimes they're hand modified. Sometimes the components inside of them are still having some engineering validation from our suppliers as well. But now in this product design and development and also validation, we now have a component that we can hold in our hands and say, okay, now that I have this, is it really manufacturable? That's the process portion of it.
Yeah.
And is it really going to function the way that we wanted based on the simulation that we had before?
Okay. And at that point, what will go wrong?
There's a lot of things.
Like we've heard, it's 3 years. I can imagine that at that point, the car manufacturers, they change things around, they change their plans. Suddenly marketing figures out that, oh, you know what, our target customer group for this vehicle, they actually love subwoofers. We have to put 2 additional subwoofers in. So
there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and not just from the manufacturing point of view. So let's say there could be our suppliers. Our suppliers can come to us and say, you know what, we can't make the surface as pretty as what your requirement says it should be. So there's that also. So we have to work with our suppliers. And that delays time, right? You have to understand what is not feasible now that you've done a part or you have a part in on hand, and then what can you do to either try to make it happen, tune some of the tools maybe, or even sometimes going to our customer and saying, we really can't meet this criteria or this requirement. And that's when the negotiation happens with the suppliers, ourselves, and also the OEMs. And there's also, so that's one example. And then there's change management, right? And this is actually big maybe for your listeners. They're like, oh, I hate change management because now we have to change our timing and have recovery plans. The changes are normal. There's changes because we, maybe like what you said, marketing, we want to meet it, or maybe a technology is better, or just changes from the from even manufacturing, right? How we handle those is, number one, we understand what the impact is to that part. And then we prioritize on what we need to create, what we need to validate, and then we go back to the customer and say, from the timing that we now have, if it's like less than 6 months, what can we do to meet what you're asking for? And that's when the negotiation happens. Sometimes we would meet it, sometimes we don't. And that's just the reality of it. But yes, changes happens during this product development phase. And we have to adjust not just the tooling, but packaging of how we're going to ship things and then how they're going to receive it on their shipping.
Now, I'm not sure about how much we can talk about the financial side of this, but one thing that interests me is this. There is a lead time of potentially 3 years from the beginning to, okay, it's now in production and cars are being sold. How do you get paid during those 3 years? Are you being paid for all the planning, the design, the work that you're doing? Or do you have to wait until finally your equipment is being produced and put in the cars?
So this is, again, I'm talking about general, right? When there is any scope changes, the customer understand that there might be things that you have to implement that will cost money. And that gets discussed. Finances, this gets discussed. I can't go into details of it, but yes, we do get adjustment because of the changes. But if it's a minor change that we can still do during the development, let's say just a minor tweaking on the software, then we usually don't. It's just a part of that development fee that starts from the beginning of the project.
Okay, good. And then slowly, we move into the product and process validation. That happens a little bit in parallel with the design and development of the product and the process. What exactly do you do?
So we actually have 2 phases of validation. One is called design validation, which is DV. And then the other one is process validation, which is PV. The design validation, we focus more on, is the design working? And if it's not working, then what can we do to make it work? The process validation is more, we know the design is working, but when we manufacture X number of parts, are we going to have issues throughout manufacturing process? So those are the 2 items that's on the APQP.
Okay. And when I look into the details, very small, it says there that during product and process validation, pilot. So is that when a pilot actually happens, when you start delivering the first components to the manufacturers and they put the first cars together?
Right. So each customers have different pilot phases. Some of them maybe are heavy in the very beginning of the development, which is parallel to the product design and development. And then some of them will ask us more parts after it's coming off tooled. Which is your mass production intent parts already. So that's during the pilot phases when they ask us for components, they put it into the vehicles and they test it themselves as well. And then launch, obviously, our parts that are mass produced.
And then it starts getting into the actual production phase. How normal is it at this point that the customer comes to you and says, you know, I know we're starting production in just a few short months, but we have to make changes here?
Yeah. So that's more normal than you would think, honestly. So not only are you ramping up, right? So when we start production, it's not just boom, here's the quantity and we need to make X number of quantity. We slowly ramp up, right? This is the quantity in the beginning and then it gets larger. While that's happening, and this happens more on a newer technology, there's sometimes it just doesn't work and you have some countermeasures or even some changes that they want us to do. And we usually wait until the next phase. So there's something that they call SOP plus 90 days. That's very common throughout all of the OEMs. So if we find something that we need to change, we wait until that phase so that there's a clear break of when changes can occur. So that's...
Okay.
Yeah.
Because when I think back, one of the items that I found fascinating is way back when the iPhone came out, how very quickly car manufacturers adjusted to the iPhone, and within just a couple of years, there were suddenly attachments for the iPhone in the car that would allow me to dock my iPhone and play music on the car stereo. So that must have been an enormously hectic time for you and your company as well, when suddenly the car manufacturer is coming to you saying, we need to build this into your product. I know it's only a year until this car comes out, but now get going.
So there are things that we know in advance. And we have, there are things that we can prepare for in advance. But of course, we didn't plan to implement it at a specific date. So there are things that we can work during that time. And then for the things that we don't know, then yes, the product development team work triple time, right? So that they can make it happen. But OEMs are very good in helping us, making sure that it's still a quality product before going into mass production and launching.
So even though we have this big planning phase up front, that does not actually, the graphic that we've seen does not actually represent really our discussion, because it looks like changes happen constantly. You constantly have to replan, you have to adjust, you have to update, you have to renegotiate, and you may have to do this within 7 months instead of a whole 3 years. Yeah.
But one thing that I can say for sure is, having a planning in the beginning of this development is always good, because you have a lower risk of actually changing because of issues. Yes, you may change because of a customer request, but in terms of the issues that we might have during mass production, that's the planning is the good part of it, is making sure that we don't have those issues, right? So the core of your design is still good because of the planning stages. So it's still important.
Is your life very hectic?
Yes.
Yeah. And this is, we talked a little bit before the interview here, and you told me that you arrived yesterday and that you were actually a little bit nervous that you came 2 days before the conference starts and that you're out of the office. And so there is always something happening then back at the office, and something that requires your intervention and your help.
Right. So we have a very strong team. And honestly, I believe that I also have strong senior managers as well that works with the team of program managers that we have. But there are also, again, changes that happens within 2 days very quickly that we have to understand. And I'm not saying that, I'm an expert so I can ask the right questions. But having the leaders always there, it helps the program managers think more in detail. Have you thought about this? Did you ask this question? Can you make sure that you get this requirement before we start the work? So that still happens. And so, yes, I'm nervous when I'm away, but at the same time, we do have a very strong team. It's just the support system that they need.
How much technical know-how do your program managers, your project managers need in order to, and I'm not using this word lightly here, survive in your environment?
So most of the time we look for program managers that have 10 to 15 years of experience. But nowadays, we also look for people that would be able to survive the hectic schedules. And that tends to be, honestly, the millennials, right, sometimes. And they don't have that much experience, but they're very quick learners. So I think with just coaching and mentoring from, again, the leadership, they can survive the day-to-day of the automotive industry.
In plan-driven approaches, and this particular one that we're talking about here, and I have to look it up every time, the Advanced Product Quality Planning Approach, APQP. Since it is plan-driven, a lot of planning up front, changes are not usually something that is welcome by the team. And this was something that, in the 70s and 80s, changes were just something, no, we don't want changes. Keep your changes in the back room, and we can't put that in. Does your team welcome changes that the customer brings?
We do. I mean, it's hard to implement changes at a very short time. But yes, we do welcome changes because it's also for our advancements, right? So it's challenging to us, but at the same time, if you're the first one, like what you said, iPhone, to actually release a phone with an LCD screen, then that's also a positive, right? So we can't move forward to the new technology without the challenges from our customer. And so that's why we invite changes and we welcome them.
So to close our interview, we've looked at APQP, we've seen that it's plan-driven, we've learned through stories that it's occasionally quite different out there in the real world. Where do you see APQP going? What's changing? What has to change?
Right. So that's actually a very good question, and I'll tell you why first. A lot of the components are becoming more electronic. And a lot of development timing are actually becoming shorter, right? So from 3 years to 1 year to maybe 7 months is shorter. I think, and this is just my personal opinion again, the APQP probably will not be as linear as it is. A lot of the activities would be done in parallel or even maybe heavy on the beginning, on the planning stages. Maybe we'll have a backup already. If this doesn't work, now this is the backup and it's going to work in parallel, or we're going to develop it in parallel. I think that's at least what I can see would be happening for the APQP.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Mary Grace Soleil, thank you so much.
Thank you.